For the latest in strategic affairs, subscribe to our YouTube channel. Click the bell icon for updates.
Hello and welcome to StratNews Global. I'm Nitin Gokhale. Today, I'm joined by Australia's High Commissioner to India, Barry O'Farrell, who's been in the post for almost 2 years now, and is someone who's looking at not only improved India-Australia relations, but also taking them to the next level. As we speak to him in the backdrop of the Quad meeting that happened in Australia, it's something that we would ask him questions about, and of course, the larger India-Australia relationship, and of course, how Australia sees the Quad and the geopolitical situation in Asia Pacific, or what we now call Indo-Pacific. Welcome to this program, Barry. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Nitin.
So first up, let me start with the Quad meeting just happened last week. How do you see it? I know the statements have been issued, but sitting here in Delhi, how do you view the outcomes?
I think it continues to show the evolution, the growth and the strength of the four partners coming together, never being satisfied with the last work program they set themselves, but always setting themselves a more ambitious agenda to be shared across the Indo-Pacific amongst those countries who share our values, who in particular are prepared to abide by the rules of the game.
Indeed. In fact, if you look at the statement which has been put out, speaks of a lot of common ground that all of them have covered or will want to cover. One of the things in the past 2 years that was common to all four was the vaccine diplomacy. In your view, how has that worked? And between India and Australia, what is more to be done on that front?
Well, I think all four partners have a lot to do. 500 million vaccines across the Indo-Pacific is something that they can be proud of, but of course there's more that has to be rolled out. So at the same time as we're continuing to roll out vaccine, the Quad partners are also cooperating on what they hope will be the end of COVID, looking to ensure that our systems are also capable of withstanding another pandemic, whether it's COVID related or not. I know that there's been some scepticism about the rollout to date, but it's fair to say that in most countries, certainly in Australia, we had supply problems about mid last year. Our countries got through them. Our country's rolling out increasing numbers of vaccines across the Indo-Pacific, just as the other three partners are.
What about the institutionalization of the Quad? I mean, it's been just couple of years now that ministerial dialogue has taken place. There has been a highest level summit that has taken place. But how would that translate into a long-term, more deeper kind of arrangements between the four countries?
Well, I think it is. And of course, the Quad's come a long way since the four partners came together in 2004 to provide humanitarian assistance following that terrible tsunami. At various times, people, including commentators, have suggested that it'll turn into a Indo-Pacific NATO. That's not on the agenda. That's not the wishes of the four parties. And what we're seeing in any case, as we see with many bilateral relationships between two countries, is that it becomes instilled in our diplomatic and other systems that you don't need to have a separate infrastructure to support it. I was amazed when we had the leaders meeting, first leaders meeting of the Quad, how quickly that came together using existing resources in each of our government systems. I don't believe, other than ongoing commitment by all countries to the goals of the Quad, working together on common challenges in the Indo-Pacific, that it needs to have a bureaucracy built beside it.
Why have another layer? That's true. So, but you also spoke about it not being an Asian NATO. But I think in Beijing, this is viewed as an anti-China alliance in the making. How do you respond to that view that emanates from China?
Well, some people are always threatened by actions of others who have different values. And as I say, Quad partners are determined to build an Indo-Pacific post-COVID that is free, open, secure, and hopefully prosperous. We assist countries across the Indo-Pacific to be independent, to make sovereign decisions. We assist countries across the Indo-Pacific to develop economies and economic strength that promotes opportunities for their citizens. And of course, we seek to share the ambition of the Quad with those countries who, as I've said before, sign up to those rules and norms, like any game or any sport, that ensure that fair play occurs.
But China doesn't see it that way. And how do you respond? I mean, how will you sort of look at it in terms of bilateral relations that members of the Quad have with China? India has a different relation. Australia has a different relation. Does that impinge on the overall cooperation between the Quad countries?
So the Quad operates on the basis of confronting shared challenges in the Indo-Pacific neighbourhood. That doesn't mean any more than a bilateral relationship means that you're going to agree on everything. So what you do is you focus on those things that constructively can assist in delivering that positive vision for the Indo-Pacific that the Quad partners have signed up to.
So India has this view, and some commentators have sort of written about it or commented on, is that India is not very enthusiastic about being too aggressive against China because of its own bilateral issues, a difficult boundary, difficult relationship. Do you agree that India is not fully on board when it comes to creating a kind of anti-China front amongst the Quad countries or other countries together?
I don't get any sense that India's heart and soul is not within the Quad. And I think the comments of Dr. Jaishankar at the end of the Quad meeting and during the Quad meeting is evidence of that. Obviously, all of us still have bilateral relations with a variety of countries. India's not the only country, can I say as an Australian, who's had issues with China. You know, it's quite common that, it's quite obvious that we've been subject to some economic coercion. But that doesn't stop us combining within the Quad to try and develop a neighbourhood that is of the values that we seek. And it's also not something that stops us trying to repair relationships with countries with whom from time to time we have issues.
So this economic coercion that you spoke about seems to be the preferred method that the Chinese have all over the world. How have you coped in the past couple of years, especially in terms of the effect of COVID and the supply chains being disrupted? How has Australia coped with it?
Well, luckily, because I'm not a diplomat, you don't have to be a diplomat to work out that the times have changed in relation to some of the relationships in the region. The good news for Australia is that notwithstanding what some have called economic coercion, Australia's economy continues to be strong, and Australia has simply gone and looked for other markets in which to engage in order to maintain its strong economy. We don't force people to buy our goods. We assume people trade with Australia because the goods we have on offer are useful to them. And if people don't want to buy our goods, we look for other markets. We've done that for 200 years plus since Europeans first settled in Australia. And happily, our first trading partner was India. And hopefully, given events last week, we'll see increasing trade with India.
So how exactly, the point that you've made, and the next question is exactly that. How do you look India as a market, and what is the progress on the free trade agreement? I know that's an interim agreement that has been signed. So two questions here. One is, how do you look at the Indian opportunity, and what is the sense that you get about the FTA coming through?
Well, High Commissioners are always optimistic, but I have to say, having sat through the discussions last week between your Commerce Minister and my Trade Minister, I am reasonably confident that within that 30-day period that Minister Goyal spoke about, we will settle an interim agreement at the least, and we're still on track to deliver the Closer Economic Cooperation Agreement in full by the end of the year. And that's in part because we're complementary economies. India has set itself economic goals and ambitions that will require a number of inputs. Australia, particularly after the lessons of COVID, is a reliable, safe partner to provide that material. That includes, for instance, whether it's critical minerals for the battery storage or electric car sector. It's about metallic coal needed to create steel, to furnish the ambitious, very ambitious infrastructure plans that the Indian government has, and also at times when crops are either light or whatever, we have the capacity to fill shortages, to ensure that there's not shortages in this country. So free trade deals full stop, are never easy, they're never done overnight, but I remain confident about how this one's progressing.
That's a great news actually for the commerce across both the countries. One of the high points of India-Australia relationship over the past 5 to 8 years has been the defence cooperation. How do you see it from this point? I mean, it's been a great journey so far. Is it going to go up or is it going to sort of stagnate at this level?
Well, I think at different times, if I can be honest, when politicians on both sides of the ocean have been less than attentive to the relationship, our defence forces have maintained strong relationships. Defence personnel from Australia have been coming and studying in your colleges for decades, including a former Governor-General, former Chief of Defence Forces in Australia. I think the defence relationship is almost self-supporting. The weekend after next, Exercise Millen occurs off ISAG. Australian warships will again be there, demonstrating further commitment. We have Malabar that continues to grow, and of course we have Indian forces involved in land exercises in Australia. That's important, not just in times of trouble, but it's also important in times of humanitarian assistance, because the closer we're able to cooperate, particularly our navies at times of humanitarian assistance, the more we can deliver. And I was pleased only this week to see Indian supplies to Kiribati delivered by service equipment from Australia.
Yes, in fact, that was one very heartening thing to happen, because India has been talking to smaller countries, but Australia is also, of course, it's Australia's own backyard, the Pacific countries. So that's one point of cooperation, not just in Quad, but I think bilaterally too. Education has been one of the key areas of cooperation, people-to-people contact or otherwise. COVID, of course, has affected it. How do you see that improving, or is it still sort of a laggard?
Well, President COVID described the people-to-people links as the living bridge between our two countries. And it's made up threefold. There's migration to Australia, there's tourism to Australia, both of which pre-COVID had moved into the second highest level of anyone from anywhere around the world. And thirdly, of course, students. And students prior to COVID had also become the second largest nationality studying in Australia. The good news is that since we reopened our borders to students in late November, a third of all students who've returned to Australia from around the world have come from India. More importantly, a sign of how comfortable Indian students are in Australia is that even after the Indian repatriation flights commenced way back in May of 2020, 80% of all Indian students who were stranded in India during COVID stranded in Australia during COVID, stayed in Australia. That speaks volumes of the way in which we react. It also speaks to the way in which state, centre and universities in Australia support Indian students and recognise its worth, not just to the Australian economy, but long term to the Australian-India relationship. We're hoping, though, that with the implementation of the Indian government's national education policy, new national education policy, we'll see increasing numbers of Australian students doing part or all of their degrees here in India as well.
Well, that's good news for students who cannot afford to go there or are not willing to go there. But moving on from education and defence, what are the new areas that you're looking for? Is there something on technology, 5G, 6G? Is there a scope for cooperation in space or cyber? How do you look at that?
All of the above, and of course the Quad in particular is looking at cyber and critical technologies and the like. Australia and India had their first ever cyber framework dialogue whilst Dr. Jaishankar was in Australia. So all these areas are coming together, and there's, whether it's space, whether it's startups, and we're putting a centre of excellence into Bengaluru in relation to cyber and critical technology. But today, I've been part of a dialogue, the fourth energy dialogue between Minister Singh and Minister Taylor, Minister for Power and Minister for New and Renewable Energies here in India, and of course the Minister for Energy and Emission Reduction in Australia. And they've signed an agreement in relation to, or they've signed an MOU in relation to hydrogen and low-cost solar, which is seeking to reduce the cost of solar power by a third. And that's tremendous. And again, it's a complementary relationship where Australian invention has delivered a way in which you can manufacture solar panels far more cheaply than they currently can. And of course, India, which has an enormous manufacturing capacity and which can assist in getting this new technology out to the world. So barely a month goes by without some other area of cooperation arising between our two countries. And that goes to the depth, the breadth and the strength of the relationship. It goes to what I describe as those complementary strengths that both of us have. And it goes to the ingenuity, not just of Indian citizens in India, but Australians in Australia as well.
I can see that. Finally, what about return tour of Australian cricket team to India? Well, are they waiting for a revenge tour, I must say? I can see the Lord's tie that you're wearing, a cricket enthusiast.
Well, as a former trustee of the Sydney Cricket Ground, I am hoping that before my term finishes next year, we will see that Australian team tour India. In the meantime, we'll simply have to make do watching Australian players and an Australian coach in Ricky Ponting try and get the Delhi Capitals across the line in this year's IPL.
Absolutely, and I think cricket is something that binds us quite well, both the countries, apart from everything else.
I thought the funniest photo, Nitin, out of the Quad meeting was the visit to the MCG where Minister Jaishankar, Minister Payne from our two countries looked incredibly impressed, incredibly interested. And I saw a photograph where the Japanese minister and the Secretary of State for the United States clearly had no idea what was going on.
So it was cricket versus baseball there. So it was a great photo actually.
So it says that you can have different views within the Quad and still cooperate to deliver good things for the region.
That's a great line. And thanks for your time. It was lovely talking to you.